Hey, so it's Saturday. Today has been, I had my Italian class in the morning. So we went there, we did that, and I'm glad because I was really tired, slash, kind of like really done with everything. So I was kind of like, okay, can I really, learn from this lesson? And I did. So, it was pretty positive. Now we have a little assignment. We have to have like a little presentation next week, and also we have an evaluation next week as well. So, two things I have, during this week, I have to do some of the exercises and, activities that were kind of like best so I can train for the exam. And then I also have to make kind of like a PowerPoint presentation and, prepare the presentation itself. I'm thinking about doing it about Paradise Lost. I don't know, it's just that I didn't know what to present. You can present anything. And as the first thing that kind of like came to mind was that books, like that long ass poem that really changed me as a person. So I was like, yeah, that's a good thing for me to do. And then beyond that, I have to, like there's still like some other assignments that I have to do. And I don't think 3 or 4 assignments I had to kind of like get done, for this next week. So, today I'm kind of like relaxing. I'm letting my brain kind of like, because I'm pretty scattered. Something that's been happening is that like I'm really struggling to concentrate and to focus and do things. So, I kind of came to the conclusion that I had kind of like pushed myself a little too hard. So I want you to have a little rest before I resume. So today is a day for me to, and this includes not only school and work. For example, my novel, I'm also kind of like not doing anything about it today because, as I said, I'm kind of like in this, state where I'm not really producing. And I think that, what I need to do is to relax, kind of like have a little, resting moment. And then, tomorrow I'll start kind of like addressing all, like the assignments I had to get done. Particularly because some of them like are for, I have one that is, like due Monday. I actually do a little bit like later, but, I want to get it done by Monday. So, I have to kind of like work on that. But yeah, and also like that one specifically, I kind of like, I'm still a little unsure what I have to do, so that is, something. But yeah, so that's kind of like where I am at. And so today is the day of relaxation. Like I've been kind of like just resting. I watched some of the games, some of the World Cup games. It's been enjoyable. And also VNL, the Volleyball Nations League is also happening. So, my mom and I, we watched, like the match from, like earlier today, and yeah, so I'm kind of like just laying down when I'm sleeping. I am kind of like, sometimes I'm watching, sometimes I'm sleeping. I didn't, get to sleep, so well. What happened yesterday that was the game. Yeah, but anyways, so I kind of like, I've been sleeping and resting and not really using my head for anything. I'm not trying to reason because that just seems to kind of like get me nowhere. But I did make this, like I have this, like established this kind of like guideline for me. So like today, I'm kind of like do nothing, and then tomorrow, I'm the first day of the week. I'll kind of like resume. I'll start. It was going to be the kickstart the week, and I know kickstart sounds a little bit, like forceful, but it's kind of because it is a little bit. But yeah, so apart from like that, what I wanted to talk about is something that kind of continued from what I was talking about yesterday, and that, like I don't know, I was basically thinking that we are slaves to our thoughts, like we're slaves to our own brains, and because that's kind of like how I was feeling, I was really feeling, I don't want to, diminish slavery and all, anything like that, but, in the more colloquial way that we talk about it, because, our brains, they dictate everything and, anything and everything that happens, the way that we behave, the way that we interact with the world, the way that we interact with ourselves. And basically what I kind of like noticed is that there are some things that I can't escape. There are some, like thoughts. And yes, once again, I'll be talking about traumas because, man, like I'm so tired of having to deal with traumas. I really wish I could just, get free like that, but it takes longer than that. And I've already freed myself, like a lot. Yeah, I think most of the way I've come. Yeah, like I think I'm over. If like I like 100%. I think that I'm like at 70%. Which is more than like I would have said if you asked me at the beginning of the year. So like that is kind of disheartening, but I have already have like seen improvement, so that kind of like strengthens my belief that more improvement is to come, and that I don't have to necessarily make a tremendous effort, because I think I talked about it before. When I was younger, like 18 and 19, like I was very forceful with my growth, with my development. I really kind of like pushed myself to a point where it was not good. I was trying to kind of like force change to happen, but like that's not how it works. Like you have to deconstruct whatever it is that's happening, and I was not interested in doing that because that kind of like hit too close home. Like that involved like me having to accept some things, and acknowledge some things that I didn't want to. So I was kind of like stuck in that limbo of like me really needing to change and really wanting to change, but like not in the right way. I wasn't, my strategy wasn't good, because it didn't really address the root of the problem, which is kind of like, I think this sums up so much. Sometimes like we really are out here and we're just tackling the manifestations of those issues instead of like really looking deep down and like seeing what like we can and we can't, like what we can do to kind of like break down like those very those vices that we have, like those like bad behaviors, even like the good behaviors. It is something you have to program into your brain. So that is like kind of like an interesting it's interesting juxtaposition, yeah. Because sometimes like you're going to kind of like get something right by doing things the wrong way, but you have a much better chance at fixing things if you were kind of like trying the right way. And when I say right, I don't mean in a moral way. It's more in like a more practical way. It's more practical. It's kind of like the thing that the distance between 2 points is a straight line. It's kind of like that. Like there is a way that is going to kind of like yield results like more quickly, more efficiently, and you have to kind of like find that. That's basically like that's the challenge. I'm just saying it like this as if it's easy, and it's not. But you really do need I don't know, don't give up. That's basically kind of like my thing. But that's what I was saying. So I've been kind of like observing how I have how so much of what I do, so much of what I want is dictated by like the wrong things. Like I'm kind of like really moved by like some feelings of inadequacy and of like some disconnection between like what is happening in real life and what's happening in my head, because there's so much that affects me and I hate it. I hate how much something so small can make such a dent into my well-being. Like how it's really kind of like yeah, like something that I see, something that I listen, something that I read, how like those small, like they should be kind of like just these grains. They're kind of like added through this glass that is me, but like usually they have like the effect of like 1,000 then. Like it's not like just one grain of rice, it's like 1,000, and then it starts to overflow, and I'm kind of like left in that very vulnerable situation, very vulnerable position. And I kind of, as I said, like I'm tired of that. I basically got to the point, pretty much what I said, like I'm a slave to my own thoughts. Like my fantasies also, like I can't break free, which sucks because I end up missing out on so much that's happening in my life, so much that like it can actually there's so much happening, there's so much that could happen, because sometimes like there's nothing happening, but it's because like you have to make things happen. And when you kind of like you're stuck inside your head, you're kind of neglecting that. So instead of like doing things that they can aggregate, that can add to your life, in this case talking about myself, that can add to my life, I end up like just being stuck inside. Inside, I mean not just I mean maybe inside out, like that, maybe that's too much as well. Maybe I should go out more, but like right now I maybe not, like I can find meaning and like I can do things without having to necessarily go out, but like I want to go out in the sense of like getting out of my head, because there's just I can't escape my thoughts, as I said. So for example, another example is intrusive thoughts. Like so many times I struggle. They kind of like just come and go, and sometimes they don't go. I think I mentioned this the other day. I was, going to bed, and I kept having these thoughts of death, and it was not just, passive thoughts. It started to kind of getting to the point that there was planning involved, and I was very. I tried to shut down, like what was happening, the spiral I was, getting caught up in, and it didn't work. I kind of like I tired myself into falling asleep because like I ended up having to kind of like run everything, and then only then was I tired enough that I could sleep. But like that is something that kind of like scars you a little bit, because like it's just like right now I'm doing okay, I'm doing fine, and yeah, I would say I'm stable today. And when I look at like what has happened, I'm kind of like, I kind of like hug myself, like, oh, we kind of like got really close to kind of like, doing something very permanent that we cannot get back from. And I said, we, like I'm Colombian, like, yeah, it's just like, because I'm talking about my brain, so it is me, but I do see it as kind of like this a second entity. So when talking about us, I'm talking about myself and my brain. My brain, which is the source of much joy, but also much sorrow. And as I said, I feel very much attached to what's happened in a way that I cannot really remove myself from, whenever, so I start to spiral, or, I start to kind of like lose my mind a little bit because of, whatever, it is that's happening. And I'm kind of done. And there was something that I have kind of like tried to implement in my head that can kind of like help cut this flow is, being grateful about things. Not that I'm not grateful, but, kind of like expressing my gratitude, towards things. So, if I'm starting to kind of like, I'm starting to fantasize in a way that I can break from, if I start spiraling, if I start, like feeling bad and wanting, to end it all, I just, try to kind of like, literally, sometimes it can be like something that I say like out loud, like verbally, I'm like verbalizing it, like, like I'm grateful for X, I'm grateful for Y, I'm grateful for Z. And this is something that kind of like cuts that flow, but I don't always remember to kind of like do that, and that's kind of like a problem. But like it's one problem out of many, so that's okay. I don't know, but like that's kind of like a little cheat code, you could say. I start talking about, and you can start big, you can start small. I think it works both ways, but depending on how it works, sometimes like one way or another works better. I feel like when, for example, I was, laying down and I was having those thoughts, that planning and all that, I started to look at, I don't know, because I felt like when I was like that, being grateful, for example, for the fact that I'm alive is kind of like bullshit, because I was not grateful for that fact, So, kind of like starting small. For example, I was like looking at my room, so I'm grateful for my sunglasses as well, but like for my glasses, I'm grateful that like glasses exist, that sunglasses exist, because there was a point in time where that they didn't, and people were worse off because of it. And so I'm like grateful that like my vision, like I should wear glasses more. I've been trying to improve on that. I try to kind of like do better, but I still don't wear them all the time. But like but considering like how like vision impairment, like my sight is pretty good, all things considered. I do have the uses, I have astigmatism, so like I need for that. Also, like my glasses, they have like they protect against blue light, so like that's pretty good. So yeah, so like I'm grateful for glasses. I'm grateful that like I don't need like a higher degree. I don't know how to talk about it. Like your grade, like the my lenses, they're fairly thin comparatively, and so I'm grateful for that. I'm grateful that that so you start kind of like looking at, for example, my mattress. I was thinking about how I'm grateful that I have such a soft mattress, and like my mattress is kind of like a little inclined, and I'm also grateful that we figured it out, because it was getting worse for me. I think I was having reflux or something. So like when the bed is like this, it's not like that that steep. Like things are kind of like work out better for me. So I'm glad that we figured that out, and that we were able to find a solution. We just added a little slab of rock that I found, it's granite, like back when I had my internship in 2021. And so, yeah, so I found this lab and I brought it home. I didn't really have a use for it, but I liked it. So now we just have like the main thing, and then there's like this the little slab is like right here. So we were able to find a very effective solution with something that that was kind of like pointless. When I first got it, I didn't really have a use. I'm grateful that that I have water to drink water, because a lot of people don't. So, like, that's great, but also that I've been really enjoying drinking water, because you're supposed to drink a lot of water, and when you enjoy it, when you like it, like, it is easier for you to do that. I don't want to force myself to do anything. Although in this case, like, I would have to kind of like force myself, because water, you have to drink more. But you get the notion. I didn't naturally sometimes, like, you're just too despondent for that to work. So like when I was laying down, like I think it was Thursday, maybe before that, but yeah, that day when I was laying down, like nothing was appealing to me, nothing was appeasing me, and I thought, so that didn't really work. Also, it didn't really occur to me that I was kind of like really caught up in the thoughts, which is nice. Maybe it's good for you to spot these patterns, because the earlier you start, I think the easiest it is. So like when I start to spiral, it would be easier for me to look around and be grateful for things, and kind of like sometimes you have to say it out loud. And I know it's silly, but like what's like, it's your mental health that's at stake. Like you can be a little silly, but yeah. So when if you catch yourself at the very beginning, same thing with like a fantasy. Like when you're in the middle of it, like it's almost impossible, for me to kind of like get out. But if I'm kind of like, if I catch myself at the very beginning, when thoughts is starting to happen, then I can kind of like cut the flow. But yeah, and also like gratitude is really important, and it is something that I've seen people saying that it is not so much a feeling, it's more like an attitude, and I think it's both. But I do think that transforming it from a feeling to an attitude, like it really changes things, for changes things for you. So yeah, so that is kind of a little cheat code, you could say, that I have found. And I don't know for how long it's going to work, because there's always the chance that things they get worse, and maybe like there will be a day where I will kind of like, even if I'm catching things right at the beginning, like it won't work. But for the time being, I have that, so like that is pretty good. That's pretty much what I need, all things considered. I sometimes, like, all it takes is for you to kind of like get through like a moment, so if there's something that you can do to make sure that you don't take like the permanent way out, like you should kind of like take that, because it's very relevant. So sometimes you just have to kind of like push for like an hour, half an hour. Sometimes it's going to be a day, it's going to be longer, maybe. That's how the episodes happen. But I think that if you keep in mind that you just have to kind of like walk a little further, you don't have to kind of like reinvent the wheel, in terms of creating solutions for your mental illness, mental health issues. Sometimes you just need something that is going to be kind of like a placeholder, because and I think that when I was younger, I would not really want placeholders. I wanted to find the absolute truth of something right away, and I didn't want to put anything in its place while I was figuring things out. So that is not helpful, like that is not, but I understand, like I can be quite intense, and also I can be a perfectionist. So which in this case, it means that I don't, that placeholder feels like a half solution. It's not necessarily, but like that's kind of like how my brain looked at it back in the day. So right now I'm kind of like trying to embrace placeholders more often, like than not. That is still something that I can probably do better. But I will say that in some ways, like, I really internalized the whole thing, because sometimes like the placeholders are what come first thing in my mind. It's like the half-assed. They're not half-assed, as I said, but like they're not the full solution. They're not the full. They're maybe you're not seeing the whole picture, the full picture yet, and you don't have to kind of like do that right away. But as I said, when I was younger, I really wanted to, and I thought that like my worth, my sense of self, they would be compromised if I didn't get it, like the full thing right away. But not so much anymore. I think that what is left is just like habit. I kind of like had this habit all my life of wanting full truths, right away. So kind of like finding something that is only halfway there, it felt like a failure, and for so like even if I no longer subscribe to those beliefs, even if I'm no longer kind of like I no longer think of failure that way, it's still something that permeates, which is interesting because like what do you do when you have something that you have already deconstructed in your brain, but like it is still living a mark? It still kind of like it still has an impact. Because for example, I kind of like have come to accept that I will never be the version of strength that I had in mind when I was 13, because that version was also based on trauma that I had, on the things that were happening to me. Not only that trauma, earlier traumas and other, traumas in general. Naturally, like, you could argue some of them are not, in the same, you can't really like equate, there's no like the equivalence of them, like in terms of like harm. I don't know, like maybe, maybe yeah, maybe no, maybe like they kind of like had the same weight, or maybe they didn't. But it is interesting to kind of like break down like all the things that happened in the past that kind of led to you, led to me, kind of like having that vision of strength. Also, like that version of strength, like it was perfect in a way. It wasn't perfect, I think, according to what most people would see perfection as. I do know that parts of the population probably agree with that vision, and it's interesting because like I was on one hand, I really wanted to be that version of strength, but on the other, I kind of like I saw other people, I saw other men kind of really like transcribing to like their mindset, and I kind of like judge them, which I'm not judging way of like trying to make anybody feel bad about themselves, but in a way that I'm like, yeah, that is kind of pathetic. Basically, that's kind of like the judgment that I had. And it's interesting because like it wasn't lost on me that like that was also pathetic for me to do, because that's kind of like how I saw it. I know, I think that there was this hypocrisy of like me kind of like seeing some of like those versions of strength, I would call them like those people weak-minded, which is ironic, but it is true, because like that, it is a lot of like, there's a lot of like mechanisms at place, and not healthy mechanisms. It's just like a lot of like defensiveness, a lot of like projection, a lot of insecurities that are not really dealt with. They instead they kind of like they form, it's kind of like a carcass that they form of like what they have to be in order for them to like no longer be the person of themselves who they actually were. So as I said, pathetic is a way of to put it. And it's interesting because even now, like I can look at myself and be kind of like, that was kind of lame that I had those, but I totally understand why. And it's interesting because sometimes I still crave some of those, not the full picture, not the whole thing, but like some parts of like that version of strength I'm still trying to kind of like replicate in my life. And I'm at a point where I feel like I'm finally accepting that mode of strength does not work for me, because it is not who I am. It's not, it doesn't really kind of like work with the entirety of who I am and the person who I want to be, the things I want to do, and I'll be better off if I can just completely cut that out. If I can really remove myself entirely from like that equation, I will be better off. And that is, like there's nothing, but like getting your brain to kind of like accept that, it is so hard. It's been taking like years for me to get to a point, where I can genuinely look at myself and be like, no, I don't want to be that. I don't want to be the strong one, basically, because I think for so long, like that was kind of like the main trait that I wanted to have, and it wasn't like a straightforward version. It was something that had been molded by trauma and by the world, society we live in, and all of that. And I kind of like wanted that to be a defining trait. And like these days, I kind of don't care too much about it. Like I don't care if a person thinks of me as weak or not. So that is an improvement. But at the same time, like I still kind of like cater to this version of myself in my mind. So like it's maybe I don't care what people think, but I care what I think. So it's kind of this two-way. It should be a two-way street, in which I'm kind of like I'm expelling, not expelling, but like I'm projecting, not projecting in a bad way, but like, I'm projecting, I think like you're not really, like when it's not, like how it's not, like healthy, but like I'm still projecting in a way that I'm like, I'm manifesting. Oh yeah, I think that's a better word. I'm kind of like manifesting these traits. I'm not trying to be these traits. I just am being myself, and that involves, like these particular traits kind of like happening all around. So it should be kind of like there's like an output and then there's an input, and I feel like sometimes like this becomes kind of like a circle because like instead of like getting external validation, I get a certain validation from myself. And it's interesting because like it is I don't know how to properly explain it, but it is both like me kind of like thinking of people, because it's a very specific set of people that I'm thinking of, which usually has to do with my with my insecurities, my fears, like my failures, like, and kind of like, so it's kind of like there's this imaginary group of people that I'm kind of like trying to appeal to. Those are not, so it's technically it is other people, but at the same time it's not, because it is not really, those are not really individuals. Like those are kind of placeholders, you could say, like, because they change, like as I get better, as I deal with things, in a healthier way, as I stop kind of like, resorting to these mechanisms, they are unhealthy and that will make me unhappy. As that kind of like happens, I end up like some of those seats are replaced by other things, and sometimes some of those seats they're filled by some people who I cannot escape. Like those archetypes. Yeah, I think that would be the best word. Like those archetypes, like they represent, certain descent. Those are the ones that, they're kind of like whenever I was talking about like me hearing, reading, or seeing something, and like it's those, like it's kind of like those specific, but like no, it's very rarely it's like a specific person. A couple times it is. There's like one individual that I think of like way too often, and is a person who I haven't interacted in since I deleted Twitter. So that was like 2021. It's going to be 5 years, and sometimes this person is worse. And it's interesting also because the era where when I interacted with this person was like 2016, 2017, maybe 2018. I was already kind of like moving away from some things, but like that was the period of time that I was kind of like interacting with this individual, and it's been a decade almost, and like I still think about what this person thinks sometimes, like whenever I see something, or it's, like I'm just existing, and then suddenly I have like, okay, this person has said, that this person would have said this person would have done this, and I hate it, because I just want to be set free. But as I said, we're slaves to our thoughts, so I think, so this is one specific person that has been plaguing me, even though she lives rent free in my head. To be completely honest, I mean, there are moments where it gets better and worse. It's not like I'm thinking about her every day, but like there's going to be, I'll probably be like some months without even thinking about this person, and then suddenly it comes back, and then for like a week, like for a week or two, I have this person's voice in my head, and I hate it, because also like I'm not interacting, and I don't wanna interact. But that's the thing, like I moved away from a lot of like different people, institutions, ideas and stuff, and I'm better off for it. I don't want to go back to that point where I was kind of struggling to figure things out for myself, because something I have to consider that sometimes I don't really love, because I'm pretty set on my beliefs, and I think for anybody who knew me as a child, like you would not be surprised about like how I ended up, what I ended up thinking, because I've always had, like even before, even when I was a kid and I wasn't specifically thinking about politics, there were already things that I valued or that I didn't value. So I think that if you knew me as a child, you probably, you wouldn't be surprised, like about my political orientation and all of that. And but at the same time, like I had to break free, because I was brought up in an environment which was kind of like the opposite of what I what I believe in, and it was kind of like this, that there were like many dichotomies in my head, because on one hand, like I believed this, but I was raised to believe this, I believe that, and I was raised to believe this. So there was kind of like that, process of like me kind of like having to break free from, like the notions of things that were imposed on me. Like I had to kind of like find myself. And right now that I'm pretty sad and everything, like because a lot of like this change happened in the year of 2019. There were already things that I think, because also like I existed, because I'm thinking about, there are two sides of my existence. There's like my real life, so I have like my parents, my family, relatives, family, friends, and then there is, like my life online. I no longer have that life because I deleted all my social media, which was great. I don't regret it. I don't plan on coming back to social media or anything. But I had a lot of people who were kind of like, I would call friends, that I kind of like that they, like I never met them in person. Our interactions were online, and I kind of I don't know, it's interesting because I'm thinking about the year 2019, and because I think that online I was very open, about what I thought, what I didn't think, and all that. And in real life, I was a little bit more. There were certain things, there were certain buzzwords, for example, that like they, whenever they kind of like rang the bell, I would talk about them. I wouldn't just let things go. So like usually prejudices, bigotry, like I never really be okay with that. So whenever something was said or done, like I was always like countering and like pointing out how things were why people were wrong, and or why what they said was harmful, and so I've always been like very much an advocate in that way, but I never committed in a lot of different areas because we're talking about social issues, and social issues and politics, like they go hand in hand, like they are very much it's the type of thing that you can't separate. This is something, this is true for like any spot in the spectrum, in the political spectrum, like those two things are intertwined, and like things come together. And so yeah, so I think I was very vocal about like this, but you can still talk about one without addressing the other. So that's pretty much I think like the where I was at, because also like even for myself, because I think I talked about this before, I was raised in a certain way that they have this kind of like fail safe, because basically they said that like this is what you're supposed to think. If you think anything other than this, you're being manipulated. It is the world talking through you. You're letting the world win, that type of stuff. So I didn't want to be used. I didn't want to be manipulated. I didn't want to be like let anybody control me, which is kind of funny because they're being controlling when spelling it out, but like you're being controlling when you're saying this. And but like they made me kind of like a little paranoid with like anything and everything I said, which was horrible. It's something else for me to be grateful about is the fact that I no longer struggle so much with that, because for so long like it was I kept running in circles in my head because I was like, but I think this, but this, what about this, these things are kind of contradicting themselves, and that has to do with like whatever. And this is true for like any belief system. Like if you're raised in a certain way, there's always going to be things that you're going to disagree with, things that are kind of like you steer away from, which is interesting because I think a good example that I have is my dad, because my parents, they're both Christian, they're both very devout, they have their faith, and they're very active in that. My mom, like she's constantly studying things, like in the Bible or movies and all that. But anyways, the point I'm trying to make is that my dad, he was born and raised in a Christian home. It was a certain church that was not great, like it is. I think these days it's classified as a cult, but it was a version that was very, and also like it still exists to this day. My grandma and some of my aunts are still part of it, but like they are much lighter now. A lot of like because it was very oppressive, and it's still oppressive, but like it's not as oppressive anymore. They have worked a lot, but I think my dad, in a certain way, he has some trauma from that, not as much as other people would have, but the point is that he grew up in that environment, and he still is a Christian, but he is a different type of Christian than like the one that he was kind of like maybe raised to be, because as I said, that was just a very oppressive mindset. Like it was one of those where like everything is from the devil, everything is sinful, like for example, an example that we have is that my grandpa, my dad's dad, he used to love the period around Christmas. He loved Christmas itself. He also loved Christmas lights, but like because of the church that they were in, they said that was sinful, so you couldn't decorate your house, you couldn't do the things, you couldn't have like the lights on. You can visit spots, like where like the city kind of like has the slightest place, and that was that's something that today my grandma, my dad's mom, she kind of regrets because she could have let him, let him and also the children like be more, and she didn't. She was kind of like enforcing those notions very sternly. And so yeah, so basically the point I'm trying to make is that my dad, he grew up in an environment, he grew up a Christian and still a Christian, but still there was kind of like a little separation between the version of Christianity that he was brought up into and then the version that he kind of like operates today. So like that's the point. So like you're always breaking free from things from your childhood, from your like your teenage years, and sometimes like those changes are going to be very drastic. Like you really have to like you're going to be kind of like caught up in a whirlwind almost, when you kind of like just realize how things are different. And sometimes like you have to kind of like move away from people because they can be very like they can be toxic. She wouldn't say toxic because what I mean, because sometimes something isn't inherently toxic, but it is kind of like toxic to you because of the way that you live your life, because of the experiences that you have. So for example, sometimes words can be used in a way that like they're not the words themselves, they're not inherently bad, but because of experiences somebody had, like you string those words together and then kind of like you can trigger somebody basically. So that's pretty much what I said. And I'll say what I meant, saying that something can be toxic, like not that it is inherently so, but depending on your context, like it's better for you to kind of like separate yourself from the thing that is being bad for you. And I think that people are both really stimulated to kind of like really stimulated, like they're very much I think if you go online and you just see people having to stay, a lot of people are going to say that you have to stay all the way or that you have to leave any size. And I think that usually they're somewhere in between. Also, you have to look at things at an individual basis because and also just like not an individual basis, but like get the details, because sometimes like there's more there than we kind of like were more than we initially think. And I think particularly like when it comes to people trying to make decisions for their lives, some decisions are kind of hard to make and they will have like a very permanent impact in your life. Like even if you kind of like sometimes like you get back to where you were at originally, it's still something that is that like the time that you spent apart, for example, like you can kind of like change, can break or make, can make or break like it can be like your interactions with the world, it can be like your interactions with yourself, it can be kind of like your professional life, your social life, your academic life, all those aspects. You have to kind of like be careful, but at the same time, like I don't, because sometimes like if you go, because people are different, so like if you tell somebody who is already really overtly cautious, like that might just get them to like not do the thing, and maybe they should do the thing, maybe it is something that would be beneficial to them. And but sometimes like like somebody who's just like always like letting loose, so like you tell them that to just like go, and then they will, and that they're not going to grow from that situation or whatever it is that they're going through. So basically what I'm trying to say is that actually I don't know what I'm trying to say. I kind of like lost my thought at some point, and what I was talking about originally is the thing of like people being kind of being slaves to our thoughts, and that is very much true. And it is something that I'm trying to kind of like create some distance, and I did talk about my legit code, but that's not enough, because I feel like this is placating like the issue, but it isn't addressing it. Like it's not getting to the nip, we're not getting to the bottom of it, and I don't want to have to get to reach rock bottom for me to get to this point, because like this last like the whole situation the other day when I was going to bed, like that felt a little bit like rock bottom. Like when I was at the very end of it, I was like, oh my god, we are doing this. And I've been thinking of a method I never tried before, and it's I don't want to talk about that anymore. It's kind of like over for now, and I'm going to my doctor next week. We're gonna change my medication, and I'm gonna be okay. And this is no longer going to be something that I always have episodes, I always have ups and downs. So I kind of like accept that. But the thing that I mentioned of catching yourself at the very beginning, it works also for episodes, because the moment you catch that you're shifting, like that is time for you to do something about it. And there's always something you can do. Although I will say that there's been a couple of times in my life where it really felt like we exhausted all the possibilities. There was nothing else that we could do. But thankfully, we were we were able to something changed. I'm thinking of back in 2024, my psychiatrist was very much like, we have one less reward, and it was a whole thing. But the point is that sometimes it feels that way, because sometimes it is that way, but you just give some time to this, to whatever is happening, because you can come up with like a different solution. And it's also important to kind of like value like the because sometimes you're kind of like wasting time. It's not that you're wasting, but like, for example, I'm thinking of myself back in 2024. It was like around June, so 2 years ago. And basically, like, I was at this point where I was kind of like just buying time. I was just like, okay, like today nothing's gonna happen. I'm going to still be catatonic from all kind of like fucked up from the medication I'm taking, and not which I was taking because I was being kind of like a bit of a trash myself. So like I had to kind of like take the medication like that. So like it was what I felt at the moment was very much like, what are what's the point? I'm gonna keep doing this forever of and me not doing anything, and kind of like being stuck here. And but like those days were important because they kind of like they bought me some time, until we finally got a solution. When I say solution, it sounds very final, and that's not what I'm trying to say, but like I know it was a remedy, it was a remedy. So yeah, so like it's not to overlook like these things that you do sometimes, because I feel like we only have like a very limited time of being alive, and there's so many things to do. Although I will say sometimes like I don't really when depression hits, it's kind of hard for me to think this positively, because not even like positively, but it does feel like that. It feels like I'm trying to reach for something, trying to I'm grasping at straws to kind of like trying to do something that will kind of like get me to kind of like want to stay. But basically what I'm trying to say is that like it might feel like a waste of time because you're not really doing anything, but this is a waste of time that is buying you time. So maybe like that week is going to be lost. You won't really be able to do anything. You won't really be able to kind of like work through anything. And I really do like you won't be able to kind of like work do anything, but like still you survived. So sometimes like all you need to do is survive. Survive another day, survive another night, and in the morning you figure it out. Maybe you will not figure it out. Maybe you'll still be kind of like bound by whatever thing's dragging you down. But so you kind of like, you're gonna push it another day. You're gonna waste another day, and but you're gonna come out on the other side. And it's not that it will have all been worth it. I feel like that is a very romanticization of like the whole situation, and maybe we shouldn't do that. But there was a point, like you were getting somewhere. I feel like sometimes it's hard to think that there is a somewhere you're getting into, and this gets back to kind of like whatever you think like it's your purpose in life. I personally believe there isn't like a given purpose. I think that people can find purpose in different things, in religion, in ideologies, in ideas, in passions. So they're all very kind of like relevant. But I so for me basically it's kind of like, what do I make it out to be? Like whatever. And I feel like sometimes like my go-to answer is my novels. Like I'm here to write because I love writing, and it's something that I'm passionate about, something that kind of like helps me, something that makes a difference, something that makes me feel very fulfilled throughout the the journey, but also with the final product. So I think that is a really good kind of like answer to have, because but at sometimes like it doesn't feel like it's enough. Whenever I'm feeling inspired or motivated, I kind of like struggle a little bit. I mean, you can still feel motivated by things even if you kind of like are not like working on them directly that day, but there's always something. And I think that ultimately my general understanding of life is that I want to enjoy myself. So naturally, like, we all have responsibilities. There are things that we have to do. So I'm not talking about just giving up everything and just jumping into like this, life where you have no cares in the world. But it's just that, you find something. So for example, yesterday I started assembling a puzzle for the first time, like in a while. I had a picture, show up on Google Photos, today, that was from when I finished, like the last 5,000 piece puzzle that I assembled. And it's been a year, like I've been kind of like out of it for a year. I've been focusing mostly on my writing, which is why I haven't, but like right now we have the World Cup, so I'm thinking about like maybe if I need some relaxation, I kind of like put on, the games, and I'm assembling the puzzle, and it's going to be a good actor. It's going to be good for my head, so like that's good. Maybe like that's the ideal, that's the kind of like distraction for me to kind of, not distraction necessarily, but like the ideal thing for relaxation, because I'm doing something that's kind of like distracting me, it's engrossing me, but it's also kind of good for your head. So that is kind of like where I am at with that. But yeah, so anyways, so in conclusion, I am kind of a slave to my thoughts, and I wish I were not. I wish that I could exist. I wish things wouldn't hurt me so much. I think that's ultimately that. I wish, because I feel like I'm hurt all the time, and I'm wounded all the time. And that is not, very conductive for me to live a good life. Because, if I'm thinking about like the pros and cons of like keeping, being existence, like the pain is a huge one, like the pain is like very much up there. So it's like, oh yeah, I can have a very mediocre life, and I have to put up with all this pain, and for what, so I think that sometimes like an investment in quality of life is an investment in your well-being. I mean, I think that's pretty obvious, but it's just like I'm thinking about material things that you can do. So for example, going on a tour, on some museum, or something like that, some cultural shit like that. It's something that like I don't know, it expands your perspectives, and also it gets you to think about the I don't know, it just makes things a little more dynamic as well. And it also it is something that is an investment, like you wanting to live, basically it's kind of like that. So I have my fantasies, and I will say they haven't really been engrossing me as much anymore, which is great, which means I'm kind of like enjoying my real life, which is all that I want / need for like the time being. And there's also the things about like people saying, doing all that, hurting me. It's one of those things that like for the longest time I didn't even want to acknowledge because it made me feel weak. But as I mentioned at some point in this video, I don't care about being strong anymore. Like I that's not really one of my preoccupations, and it's not that I want to be weak or anything like that, but it's just that I don't know, I think that I was so caught up in so I was caught up in the pain, basically, and that's pretty much why I wanted to be strong. And right now, I'm not so much so caught up in the pain anymore. So like I no longer care. I'm like nah. Like, and it's also it's that thing, like people think I'm weak. So be it. I don't care. But not in like I don't give a fuck type of way. It's more like yeah, like I can live with the assessment, because I have my assessment of myself and of where I am at, and that is more valuable in some ways, because I have access to my brain, so I know if I'm being a coward, I know if I'm being weak, and so yeah, so like I can actually address the things, so that's pretty good. But yeah, so the pain, I want to get rid of it, but and I've had different strategies throughout the years. So for example, for a long time I was very much focused on damn, I lost my train of thought. I lost my train of thought. But yeah, oh yeah, numbing. I was kind of like numbing myself. But the thing about numbing yourself is that you cannot really choose, what you care about and what you don't. And also things, they end up like affecting you in a variety of different ways. Particularly, like it kind of like. It's kind of like when you're trying to grab sand, when it's either you grasp and like like the more sand escapes. It's kind of like it's falling through like each of your fingers, and so like it's kind of like it permeates throughout your whole life. So for example, I'm not displaying anger at the thing that hurt me, but I am displaying anger at a different context that has nothing to do with that. And that is something that, like, when I look back, was very prevalent in my life. Like, there were some things that got me really angry, like got me irate even, I would say. And they were not that significant. They were not like that big of a deal. But like, what was happening was that like, I was kind of like projecting that anger because I felt weak if I demonstrated any type of feeling, any type of whatever regarding those situations that directly hurt me, and particularly the ones where people, they said stuff specifically with that goal, of like hurting me. So like, that is something that I feel like. And also, like, my other strategy was like, I'm hurt, I'm gonna hurt them back. And that is also something that like, maybe maybe it's not like the right not like, but that might not be the right approach. I remember a conversation I had with my aunt and with my aunt and my cousin, and basically we were talking about cheating and kind of like what you do, like, would you forgive? So I think the thing was like, my cousin was asking like, what would my aunt do, my aunt do if like my uncle cheated on her and all that. And I basically said, which is kind of like how I, to this day, I still see, I still think that what I said makes sense, which is that basically you go and you cheat back on them. So like, they cheated you for with a one night stand, like, you go and have a one night stand. They had like a 9-month long affair. You go and have a 9-month long affair, which to me, like, it just kind of like, because I would never really I don't really want to be in a relationship, like, that's not really something that is my plans. But like, if I were, I think that for me to be able to forgive a person, I have to kind of like, we have to be even, basically, and maybe even a little bit more, because like, who instigated? So maybe, like, instead of 9 months, you do 10 months, something like that. Anyways, so that was kind of like my take. My aunt said, my aunt is also my aunt is a Christian, so she's like, this is not what Jesus would have wanted. It's something along those lines, that because you're kind of like doing the wrong thing as well. Like, you're basically, you're committing a sin. So your partner committed a sin, and then you also commit a sin, and then now it's no longer about you and them, it's about you and God, because you committed a sin, which I think, like, it kind of makes sense from her perspective. But it is not really. But I do see where she's coming from, kind of like the whole thing of like, yeah, like, I'm getting myself dirty to kind of like get to your level, so I see where she's coming from. And I think this is the situation here. So like, in my head, I'm like, I'm hurt, so I'm gonna hurt, and that doesn't, hurting other people, like, it doesn't really solve the issue. Like, I'm still hurting after that. I think that I've historically been like a rather petty person, a little vindictive as well. And I think that for me, I think it's not so much about the situation, it's about my ego. Like, I couldn't handle being a cook, I guess. I don't know, because also, like, for me specifically, like, if I'm in a relationship and the person I'm with, like, wants to kind of like be with somebody else, like, let's open the relationship, like, problem solved, but anyways, like, that is not there's not the point of this. But basically, what I was kind of like trying to say is that hurting people doesn't make you hurt less. It gives you a little satisfaction, but like, those things, they're kind of like happening simultaneously. It's not like by kind of like hurting somebody that your hurt diminishes. It's just like, it's kind of like you have two bars. One is you're being hurt, and one is satisfaction. So like, you're still hurt, it doesn't change that, but you have a little satisfaction, so like, you're a little bit better off. But it doesn't solve the issue, because what I want right now is not so much to like hurt everybody. I don't want to care about that. I just want to not hurt. I want to feel no pain. I know that that's impossible, and that we're always going to feel pain, but I feel like I feel things excessively so. Like, I feel like I'm too sensitive, and that is something that has always been the case. But I've also always struggled to kind of like acknowledge that and to accept that, because I wanted to be strong. So I was like, how can I be strong and sensitive? It's not impossible. Like, there's definitely a way for you to kind of like do things, but the way that was happening for me, it was like, my version of strength involved like me not being affected by things. So like, the fact that it was this, like, I was mixed. There was this confusion in my head, like, between like who I wanted to be, who it was, and all that. So what I'm trying to say is that I don't want to feel pain anymore. I want things to hurt me less. And I think for that, I have to start breaking down. Because sometimes, like, a strategy that I've had in the past was also to kind of like think of the worst case scenario. So if I'm apprehensive about something, like, what's the worst thing that can happen? And then I think about that, and then I sit with it. And to some extent, like, that is a good strategy because it really kind of like it helps, like, kind of like disarm a little bit of, like, the discomfort, the pain that you're feeling. But it's also like not 100%, like, it doesn't, yeah, it's not like the best, it's not like the only strategy that you can have, because also if you're already vulnerable and you do that, you can kind of like spiral into, depression. So that's not what you want. You have to know when and where you can do that. You have to know when you are kind of like capable of doing it. And I think that's that. I have more strategies, but like the thing that I want to keep in mind now is that no more pain, and yes, I know I will always, things are going to happen, so you always will feel pain, but I don't want to, how do I put it, like, I don't want to feel pain unnecessarily, I only want to suffer as much as, like, is necessary. I know there's not really a table with like this evaluation of like how much that something should hurt, but I feel like that some things, they still hurt a lot because of traumas that I have. I think I've been able to detangle like most of this web of things that affect me, but there are still some things that they make me sensitive. There are still some sore spots, so I want to find what they are, and I want to work with them to make sure that I don't suffer as much. So yeah, I think there's that. Bye.